All right, it is now 1:05 and we will go ahead and get things kicked off here. Hopefully, other folks will join us today, but I'm glad you're here. Lots of familiar names. Hope everybody is doing well, staying happy and healthy in this unusual time. But thank you for coming to today's webinar. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me today. Of course, one of the very first tasks that comes with planning and executing a webinar is choosing a catchy title. And so I tried to do my part, given the circumstances we are in with the pandemic and its associated closures. Of course, risk adjustment operations are never closed, though I do imagine that operations and financial teams might be getting creative with their deployments of people, processes, and technologies in order to ensure minimal impact to revenue. Hopefully, the information you received today will help. And here's the obligatory slide introducing myself and why I'm qualified to speak with you today. And like I said, many of you are familiar and known to me, so you know a lot of my story. I've been on the risk adjustment side of revenue cycle operations since 2010, and I call that the dark side. And in the last 10 years have assisted 3 different vendors in developing solutions for commercial and government risk adjustment programs. So I've seen a lot of best practices, worst practices, and everything in between. And it's my passion to share what I have learned with our fast-paced and ever-changing industry. So as you refresh yourself on the summary and learning objectives for this webinar, allow me to review just a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, any questions you have for me can be input into the console, and I will stop periodically at the polling questions throughout my presentation to answer them. I tend to get really into what I am saying, as most of you know, and miss the questions. This way, I can be sure to get to them. And if I don't, I will follow up with an email. And if you think of any questions after the webinar, feel free to get in contact with me and we'll chat. The presentation deck and a recording of this webinar will be made available in mid-May after this webinar is delivered for the Health Plan Alliance. So these materials will be available. And last but certainly not least, at the end of the presentation, there will be a drawing for a fabulous door prize, or our virtual door prize, a $100 Amazon gift card. We thought that might be more fun than toilet paper or Lysol, so be sure to stick around because you have to be present to win. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of our discussion today. As long as I have been in product and business development for risk adjustment solutions, I find myself always coming back to an iceberg analogy when it comes to solving the business problems of compliance and payment accuracy. Indeed, the reaction to the financial consequences of poorly managed risk adjustment operations can seem similar to the shock and awe of hitting an iceberg. And so I'm here today to talk more about a more proactive way to manage risk adjustment operations to minimize the financial impact of incomplete or inaccurate data. Since the financial success of risk adjustment operations is directly attributable to the quality of the data that forms the foundation of the operations, we will focus today on proactive and actionable data management strategies for your EDPS and RAPS submissions, and how to understand from metrics reporting and EDPS and RAPS comparative analysis if your strategies are working well. In this illustration, on the left, I have deconstructed the major categories of submission management activities that comprise the overall risk adjustment program operational strategy. It's no coincidence that this inverted pyramid resembles an iceberg. At the top, we have the presentation layer of data, which often takes the form of operational dashboards, metrics reports, CMS report cards and metrics, and other reports that tell us how we are doing operationally and financially. But the presentation is only as good as the data management activities that precede it and form the base of the operations. And we never want to be surprised by what is presented to us and then feel like we've hit an iceberg. So today, we'll talk a lot about working backwards and working forwards for operational alignment with best practices that translates into financial success to avoid hitting an unexpected iceberg. We'll talk specifically about how to use data submission best practices to move from a reactive to a proactive approach to submissions management as the RAPS to EDPS transition continues, and also how to use EDPS and RAPS comparative analysis to develop your own actionable plan for the prioritization of risk score gap closure activities. It's this prioritization level upon which we'll focus most of our attention today, because when it comes right down to it, these analytics are used to prioritize gap closure activities from most impactful to least impactful, especially as sweeps deadlines draw near. In keeping with the events of the day, closure will be our theme, and let us begin with a brief history lesson. So that brings us to our first polling question. And I'm going to open this poll and launch it. So by what year did CMS originally plan to have phased out wraps entirely? A, 2012, B, 2015, C, 2020, and D, never. Wraps will be around as long as there is risk adjustment. So we'll give a few moments to collect some responses. I know we have some Centauri folks joining us today who I'm hoping will all get the right answer, since they know that this is all that I talk about. We'll give it a little more time. Looks like we have about 65% of folks voting. I should have said no Googling, no Googling. We're pulling up HPMS memos. All right, so it looks like we've been open for a moment, so I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share our results. So we have about 20% that said 2012, 25% said 2015, 40% said 2020, and 15% said wraps will be around as long as there is risk adjustment. The answer to this question is B, 2015. It was CMS's intention that fateful day in October 2010, and I was actually there, but only virtually because I was like 500 months pregnant at that time, when they announced the transition from the 5 data element wraps format to the X12837 electronic data interchange format, which has hundreds of data elements. It was also their intention to require the submission of all services rendered to members and not just a subset of services based on provider type as required by wraps. And as we know, this is 2020 and we're still in the wraps world, as you all know. And so yes, 2015 is when it was supposed to originally have phased out. All right, so moving along, thank you for your participation. I thought it would be helpful, in light of our poll, to take a few moments and set the stage for our discussion with a brief history lesson. Hopefully, for most health plans, their history during the transition from wraps to EDPS does not include a financial disaster of Titanic-like proportions. But I do know that this year's final notice for payment year 2021 and historical trending based on client metrics and report cards indicates that we've come a long way since 2012 when EDPS began. In the beginning, the gap between EDPS and wraps scores was upwards of 26%, according to a study done in 2015, as you'll see in the following slide. In contrast, in the recently released payment year 2021 final notice, on page 66, CMS reports that their analysis of EDPS and wraps continues to show that when comparing wraps-based risk scores calculated using the 2017 CMS HCC model to encounter data-based risk scores calculated using the 2020 CMS HCC model, the difference is quote-unquote negligible. We will explore the gap a little more in detail in the upcoming slides, but I think it's important to point out that the closure of the gap between EDPS and wraps since 2012 is largely due to the recommendations resulting from GAO audits, that's the General Accounting Office, audits of the provision of reporting and metrics by CMS that supports the development of more actionable data quality management strategies for submitters. So really it was the GAO telling CMS, you've been collecting this data for a long time, it's time to do something with it, make it a little more actionable for the health plans that are submitting it. And that's had good results. In fact, on page 64, section M, encounter data, as a diagnosis source for 2021 of that final notice, CMS stated that a majority of commenters agreed with CMS proposal to increase the blend to 75% EDPS, while only a few commented to keep it at the current 50%, and one commented that CMS do away with EDPS altogether. Doing away with EDPS is likely not going to happen since we are now 8 years into this, The gap has closed significantly, and the end to EDPS or to RAPS is in sight. It stands to reason that the transition to 100% EDPS will likely be concluded at the latest by 2023. So the time is now to optimize your risk adjustment operations. Hopefully, this webinar will help you do that. So as mentioned previously, the GAO began conducting audits in 2014 that resulted in CMS establishing baseline operational metrics and reporting for completeness and quality. Smart health plans followed suit in aligning their own operational processes with these metrics. This alignment will be even more important as our industry continues the journey to 100% of the risk score calculated upon the more complex EDPS data, and eventually HEDIS measures calculated using encounter data, as was announced last October via HPMS. By now, health plan submitters are used to the greatly expanded data requirements for the X12-837 used for EDPS, as evidenced by the closure of the gap from 26% in 2015 as a result of the study that was done by RISE with Inovalon, to negligible, and that's CMS's word, in present day. Here at Centauri, we conduct this important EDPS and RAPS analytical work on behalf of our clients. As you'll see in upcoming slides, we go the extra mile not just to identify revenue impacting gaps, but to also recommend strategies for closing them based on the plan's unique combination of people, processes, and technology for risk adjustment operations. So now that our brief history lesson has concluded, our focus now turns to actionable operational strategies for gap closure to avoid a financial iceberg. To keep it simple, I refer to the development and implementation of proactive gap closure strategies as a two-pronged approach, which are creatively named, quote unquote, working backward and working forward. The working backward part is the EDPS and RAPS comparative analytics that are focus of this webinar. But it is important to preface that discussion with how we work forward. Many of you probably remember back in June 2017 when CMS published an HPMS memo that outlines, from their perspective, a list of best practices for encounter data submission. This memo serves as a useful roadmap for the more important activity of developing and implementing actionable strategies given a plan's unique people, processes, and technology. And so now we come to our second polling question. So let me go ahead and open this poll and launch it. How many best practices did CMS list in their June 2017 HPMS memo? A, 12, B, 15, C, 17, D, none. This is a trick question because they listed worst practices. And I see we've got some responses rolling in. Give it some time here. It looks like we've got around 40% of our folks have voted. We'll give a little more time. 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll. And it looks like we had 47% said 12, 37% said 15, 5% said 17, and 11% said none. This is a trick question. The answer to this question is A, 12. Though you could turn it into a list of worst practices, certainly, by creative use of the word not in front of the action word. And now we'll talk a little bit about this list. And now I'm going to hide the poll results here. All right. CMS isn't in the business of telling health plans how to structure their operations in order to employ these best practices, since every plan's needs are unique. So in 2018, I did a blog and recorded webinar series that gave submitters a virtual toolbox for building effective solutions for employing best practices. If you employ these, you should never be surprised by what is on your report cards or operational metrics reports, and you will thus optimize your chances of avoiding that financial iceberg. If anyone is interested in that blog and webinar series, we will make the links available to you. As such, talking about the best practices is a webinar series unto itself. But I'll take a few moments to talk about another aspect of working forward, and that is aligning your operational processes with CMS operational metrics. To do that, you will need to understand how to interpret the CMS quarterly report cards and work backwards by root cause analysis to determine how to address the core issues. This analysis is often cross-functional within the organization, and whoever leads the analysis will need to be empowered with a strategic plan for engaging and affecting change. On this slide, I have noted 3 examples of typical data completeness and quality points of failure that will require you to interact with your organization's claims and electronic data interchange subject matter expert to investigate and address the root cause. Otherwise, you risk the cause being perpetually reflected on your quarterly operational report cards and metrics. Most certainly, you will see it reflected in the accuracy of the risk-adjusted payments you are getting from CMS. And as you'll see, your EDPS and RAPS financial reporting will reflect that. And this is something we do for our clients. You know, we help them understand what their report cards are telling them and help them develop an actionable plan for addressing any issues that they have. And now we have another polling question, number 3. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this. And our question is, CMS requires from health plans the submission of claims data in which statuses for EDPS? A, paid only. B, paid and denied. C, paid, denied, rejected. D, paid, denied, rejected, pended. I'll wait for some responses to come in. All right, looks like we've got almost 50% of folks voting. Give it another 15 seconds. About 50%. And I'll close the poll and share. All right, so 11% said paid only, 39% said paid and denied, 33% said paid, denied, rejected, and 17% said paid, denied, rejected, pended. The answer to this question is B, which is unlike commercial EDGE submissions and some state Medicaid programs. You might even say that this is kind of a trick question, since there is a bit of objectiveness concerning the definition of rejected. Generally, CMS regards something as rejected if at least one service line cannot be fully adjudicated by the claim system as paid or denied, such as if the claim is a duplicate, has eligibility issues, or for electronically transmitted claims, has some other EDI structural integrity issue that prohibits it from being accepted by the claim system, such as a 999 level rejection. Some health plans designate these claims as denied, and if this is the case, you are likely to encounter a much higher rejection rate for duplicates, eligibility issues, and for format and syntax issues that are checked at the 999 level, unless you screen those out. You'll see this reflected in your report cards as lower encounter volume compared to your regional and national peers, and possibly higher rejection rates compared to your peers. Because remember, on the report cards, CMS provides that intelligence where they compare you against other regional plans of the same size, national plans, and then also Medicare fee-for-service in general. All right. And moving right along. Now that we've talked about operational reporting, let's shift our focus to financial reporting and working backwards. As long as there is a requirement to submit EDPS and RAPS data in parallel, there will be a need to perform comparisons between the two to ensure that both streams are complete and accurate. It is important to remember that EDPS requires the submission of all paid and denied services rendered to members, and RAPS is only a certain subset of services based on provider type. To be able to perform these comparative analytics requires a certain skill set, as does being able to mobilize the cross-functional committee of stakeholders who can develop an actionable plan for addressing any gaps in an efficient manner. The efficiency comes with the prioritization part of the operational pyramid I showed earlier, And as you'll see, this can't just be kicked over into the IT department for them to do with no business guidance. It is important to point out not to delay this comparative analysis until right before a sweeps deadline. This analysis should be iterative on at least a monthly basis, and ideally after each MA04 comes in. Action plans should be monitored for positive trends in the reduction of missing HCCs and their associated revenue. Let's talk for a few moments about the key stakeholders you'll need in order to make this intelligence truly actionable. First is specialty analytics. These are people who understand the formats of the MA02 and MA04 and where the information on them lives in databases and how to construct the proper queries to tie the two together. This person needs to also know how to apply the CMS model software that's published in order to understand and apply filtering logic. Second is submissions subject matter experts and claims subject matter experts, and they could be one and the same person. Many of the gaps are caused by data completeness and quality issues that may have their origination in the data that is submitted by providers on claims. These SMEs lend insight into the issues and how to best correct them in the source systems. Also, suspecting activities for risk and quality are only as good as the data that feeds them. So if there are data completeness and quality issues, you will most certainly see that reflected forward as inaccurate suspecting. A person with this knowledge is arguably your most important asset to your EDPS and RAPS operations. And they're hard to find, they're like unicorns. And third is quality, for addressing all gaps, not just those that are revenue generating. There is no need to reinvent the wheel. As we all know, there is a great deal of overlap when addressing risk and quality gaps. Hence, CMS's movement to begin calculating HEDIS based on encounter data and the need for gap closure strategies that address both risk and quality gaps to get the most return on investment in effort in dollars. And I thought here I was going to give another polling question about how many measures CMS is starting with in terms of that comparison. The answer is 4. But I decided not to. But if you're interested in knowing more, definitely reach out to me because we're doing some proof of concept work for that over here at Centauri. The whole point is to collaboratively work backward. And the whole point and issue in doing this is to shift from a reactive approach, which is usually characterized by mass panic when reporting is released, or mad scrambling prior to a sweeps deadline, to a proactive approach, which is characterized by the lack of panic and scrambling. Therefore, choose or develop tools that don't just highlight the gaps, but also make it easier for you to identify effective and efficient strategies for closing the gaps, along with engaging the right stakeholders. And I'm going to do a quick check for questions. And I don't see any thus far, but certainly, pop some into the chat if you need to, and we will be happy to answer those. All right, so moving right along. Got some sample reporting here to show you, and we're pretty proud of this over here at Centauri. On this slide is an example of a tool for EDPS and RAPS comparative analysis that should serve as one of the focal points of working backward. To be able to develop, execute, and interpret the report is a cross-functional approach that requires the input of those stakeholders I mentioned previously. So here at Centauri, we have a core team of people that work on this, and I'm actually a part of that. I'm the subject matter end of this, as well as a few other things, and we have a team of really smart people working on this, and we're really proud of this effort and what we do for our clients here. Recall that in the beginning of my presentation that prioritization is one of the main strategies for effective data management. This type of comparative analysis should be the main driver of prioritizing the development of strategies for addressing gaps from most impactful to least impactful. And here, of course, you have cluster counts, HCC counts, financial impacts, and we'll talk about actions here in a minute. So you can easily prioritize in light of this data. One of the enhancements that could be considered for this report in light of COVID is to monitor telehealth encounters specifically to ensure that these are not being lost due to data quality issues, since, as you all know, the encounter must contain very specific data elements in order for it to be considered for risk adjustment. And it's something, of course, we're adding to our product roadmap for these analytics here at Centauri, because it's going to be very interesting to take a look at that in light of the pandemic. It's important to note that when considering gaps, that there is almost always a difference due to timing, meaning that the report is a snapshot in time and may include submissions of data for which no RAPS returns, MAO2s, or MAO4s have yet been received. You can see that reflected here for a not insignificant amount of revenue. These should be monitored to ensure that they eventually drop off the report. And of course, they could end up in another bucket, depending on if they've got data quality issues or something else. Reports such as these also have drill down capability so that the individual records pertinent to the scenario can be listed for tracking and trending purposes. The average amount of revenue recapture identified by these reports is directly tied to the completeness and the quality of the data. Remember that CMS reported in the Payment 2021 financial notice that the gap between RAPS and EDPS is negligible. And we see that with our clients. Generally the gap over time has closed, and generally clients that do a really good job of managing their data quality, because as you can see, some of these due to rejections, they're doing a really good job of managing those, and really the only differences are due to timing. And so that gap is usually for these better ones negligible to no more than 5%. Also of note are the scenarios that are attributable to rejections, as I mentioned. We'll talk a little more specifically on the next slide about investigating those, because it does require special expertise, as indicated previously. But the main focus of looking at this sample reporting is to see that you've got all your counts here so that you can make some prioritization decisions on what you need to work on first, but also what actions are you taking to do that. Certainly if it's data quality, as we talked about, there's a team of people who will assist with that. But other analytical work may be done by others, because this data certainly could affect accruals and other subsequent financial activities. As I said previously, it's important to do this at least once a month. Don't wait until right before sweeps, but a lot of, most people we see do it after MAO4s are received to get the most accurate data. All right. Now, although it may be tempting to punt this analytical activity into the IT department, resist the urge to use a siloed approach to this analysis. Each part of this requires very specific subject matter expertise paired with technical and analytical skills as described previously. A number of the scenarios on the report model you saw on the prior slide are directly related to the management of data quality, and thus will require to work even further backward into the RAPS returns and 277CA EDPS response reports to gain insight into the various reasons for the rejections. This will require the assistance of an EDI and claims subject matter expert who can speak the language of the X12 837 and of the claims platform, and this person is truly the key for establishing that optimal data quality foundation for any analytics that consume this data. And I'm going to give you an example of how this root cause analysis works. So our example is, you see that a high rejection percentage is happening on institutional encounters. Root cause of that, or one of them, invalid billing provider NPIs. What's the root cause of that? Well, perhaps in this case, your claims clearinghouse is not validating the NPIs against the current NPES feed, which is the national provider database that houses this data. And of course, it's a free download from CMS. What's the remedy for that, since that's the root cause? Hold the clearinghouse accountable for data quality and tell them to validate the NPIs against NPES, which is that free monthly download from CMS. If your claims department receives claims directly, meaning you're not using a clearinghouse, you'll have to analyze another level further to find out why they aren't validating NPIs. Are the claims of paper origin? Are they having problems with optical character recognition? Some other system glitch? Something else. Here's another example in light of COVID. A financial analysis shows a drop in risk scores. An analysis of the MAO4 and MAO2 reveal that no diagnoses from telehealth encounters were included in the scores. What's the root cause of that? Were these rejected by CMS after submission, or never sent by providers, or sent by providers but rejected or denied, or maybe held up in a pen status or some other appeal status or something where it's not been sent? What's the root cause of that? Were these sent with the appropriate place of service, modifiers, and risk adjusting codes? If not, why not? Root cause of that. Do providers need to be educated on how to properly submit these claims? Do they understand how much revenue is at stake if they don't? So those are two examples that I'm giving of that backward root cause analysis where you're working back from that comparative report and digging into those data quality issues. So now let me pause for just a second and look to see if we've got some questions. And we do. We have, do you think there are going to be any punitive actions from CMS for providers submitting diagnoses from telemedicine visits using Place of Service 11, however, not providing the appropriate modifier to indicate the office visit occurred via telehealth? This could be an MRA issue in the future. That is true. I certainly do believe that is going to be an issue. And I think it's just because of the rapidity that this issue has, cropped up, and, they've issued some guidance. I think that we will have more forthcoming as they start looking at the data. I certainly do that there could be some punitive actions, but again, given, the rapidity of this and the urgency, it'll be seen, what that punitive action looks like. It may be, they require resubmissions of corrected data after audits happen. They, it remains to be seen exactly what they do, but absolutely, I think that there is going to be more attention placed on this once the urgent period is over. And of course, there's a couple different ways that they specify telehealth can be sent. So when you are looking at these encounters, you have to be sure to pull the right ones and encompass all of the scenarios so that you're pulling them all in and looking at them individually. And I would even suggest, as this goes on, setting up a mini audit of just these encounters to make so that you're not going to hit that iceberg and be surprised at the end of this that you're not getting the data. You can be working this kind of, proactively rather than reactively when you discover that this was done incorrectly, and now CMS is, looming with an audit or some sort of punitive action. So hopefully that answers your question. And I think that's all we've got here. All right. So we thought it would be helpful as we bring to close our time together today to provide an example of effective analysis in action. It's one thing to talk the talk, but entirely another to walk the walk. So I've also included an example of the work we do for our clients for comparative analysis that is a bit different. So here, we have our hashtag power to solve, and we consistently demonstrate this here at Centauri. And so here's what happened. We had a regional Medicare Advantage plan report a substantial, meaning over $3 million gap between Centauri's payment year 2019 financial accrual estimate and the estimate from another vendor. And of course, we at Centauri responded quickly by researching member examples to kind of get a sense of what's going on. In all examples, HCCs were submitted prior to the published CMS deadline for the 2019 payment year mid-year payment. CMS had notified plans in June 2019 regarding diagnosis codes that were submitted and accepted by this deadline, but were excluded from the payment year 2019 mid-year payment. CMS would include the affected codes in the payment year 2019 final calculation. And Centauri had correctly and swiftly pivoted our 2019 payment year final accrual logic to include the affected codes, resulting in a more accurate payment year 2019 final accrual estimate. So that's just an example of some of the very important work that we do for our clients based on EDPS, RAPS, comparative analysis, and financial accruals. All right, so let's see if we've got any more questions before I continue. And I see only one. Let's see. Let me go up. All right. Can you tell me if the MAO4 is EDPS and MAO2 would equate to a RAPS return? Basically, the MAO2 is a report that is associated with EDPS only. that essentially tells the health plan what was accepted in terms of the encounter and or its service lines, because CMS does evaluate the service lines. So if an encounter passes the MAO2 level, which is a level of editing and checking and validating, it essentially says, this encounter is accepted for its diagnoses that are contained in it to be presented to the risk adjustment system to be evaluated for inclusion in the risk score. In the MAO4 comes via HPMS directly to the health plan that says, from all of these encounters you submitted, here are the diagnoses by member that are acceptable for risk adjustment. And it tells you whether it was allowed or disallowed. If it was disallowed, it tells you the reason why, a variety of other information. And so you could say that the MAO2 is kind of like a RAPS return, because the RAPS return tells you, was it accepted or was it not, and the reason why. So you could say, yes, they are very similar, although the MAO2 is a little bit more robust in nature. And of course, the reasons for rejection are a little more complicated for EDPS. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, and the next one we have, what is the percentage difference we've seen between RAPS and EDPS? CMS, of course, reports that they see across the industry the differences are negligible. And of course, they don't really define what negligible means. That could mean, is it less than 1%? Is it, 5%? What is that? From what I have seen, based on our own clients and my colleagues in the industry, which I keep in contact with closely, most of the clients that do a really good job of managing data quality are around 5% or less. Clients that don't do so well are much higher than that. I've seen some as high as 10 to 15, which is a little concerning, because we've been at EDPS and RAPS for a long time. But if you're partnering with the right either technology partner, or you have the right subject matter expertise in teams, you're going to see that gap be much, much smaller, particularly if you are doing the type of reporting that I demonstrated that compares that MAO4 to MAO2. And it's not difficult to do, but you have to have the right people to do it. And I think that is all the questions we have so far. Great. Actually, here we have a question regarding the 410 memo, applicability of diagnoses from telehealth for risk adjustment. In order for telehealth services to be considered, of course, we know they have to have, it says place of service, place of service 2 or CPT modifier 95 without a risk adjustment eligible CPT or HCPC be sufficient, or the risk adjustment eligible CPT is needed regardless of the service provided. An example is CPT 99441 combined with modifier 95. Would that make the encounter RA eligible? And the answer to that is, according to most people's interpretation of that memo, as long as you are submitting the appropriate, modifiers, place of service, and a risk adjusting HCPC or CPT, then it will be acceptable. So if it is not a risk adjusting HCPC or CPT, the modifier and the place of service alone will not make it so. That's my understanding and most other understanding. So it has to have those three things in order for it to be acceptable. And then of course they say the whole audio and visual telecommunication in real time. And of course that little word "and" is causing some consternation among, all of us who are dealing with this. So hopefully that answers your question, and certainly use the chat box if anybody has any thoughts to add on that, because this is a hot topic right now. All right, let me make sure I don't have any more questions here. It looks like I'm caught up on the questions. Thank you for those. Great questions.
Don, it's Gretchen. I think there are a few more if you scroll.
All right, let me scroll. Thanks, Gretchen. I think the last one I got was the one I just answered about telehealth in the memo. But let me, it gives me this little tiny box, so I can't really see that well. Okay. E-visit CPT codes are not risk adjustable. Do you also expect that CMS will update the list of risk adjustable CPT codes in the future with e-visit codes? That's a great question. I suspect that as time goes on and they get, again, more data and they take a look at what's actually happening and what people are doing, those are certainly fair game, to be added. I think that we're going to see, a lot of changes and good ones as a result of the unusual nature of this situation. So I would say that they will make a lot of updates. That we don't necessarily see right now. So stay tuned, and we certainly keep track of those here at Centauri so that we can provide our clients with the most up-to-date intelligence in that regard. And as I said, one of the things we'll be adding to some of our reporting is a specific focus on telehealth. So let me see here if we've got any more. Is there a specific guide that talks about the CMS filtering logic, i.e. modifiers that are accepted for MRA for EDS? If I understand the question correctly, for EDPS, there really isn't a filtering logic per se like there is for RAPS. Of course, CMS publishes every year, model software that health plans and vendors and others can employ to do proper financial calculations. And of course, we know that there is filtering logic with EDPS for RAPS. For EDPS, CMS's instruction is not to quote unquote filter the data, although there are still certain types of bills, CPT HCPCS codes, and other criteria for something to qualify for risk adjustment, but they don't want the data filtered, meaning they want to see everything, all services paid and denied that were rendered to members, knowing that only a certain portion of those are going to actually be risk adjustable. So hopefully that answers your question. Certainly the model software is the best guide that you have in terms of how to do this type of financial reporting and modeling. But for EDPS, the general rule of thumb is everything gets sent. They don't want any filters applied, even if something doesn't risk adjust. RAPS is still, this operates the same as it always has in terms of what gets filtered and what gets sent based on provider type and codes that are present and so on and so forth. All right. Next question. CMS is more explicit about provider types and CPTs that are acceptable for MRAs, but they apply their own filtering for encounter data and don't let you know if there is any type of bill or modifier filtering. That is true. And I think that's probably somebody, chiming in on that. That is absolutely true. They don't really have the concept of filtering because they want to see everything, and because their intention for this data is not just for risk adjustment, but also for disproportionate share hospital payments, for utilization, and now, as you all know, for HEDIS. They have 4 measures that they intend to start comparing the HEDIS calculated on encounter data versus traditional calculation to see where plans stand. And so we're actually working on some proof of concept work here at Centauri for that to help our health plan clients get ahead of that. I think that that's been delayed due to COVID, but because they were intending to release the first round of reports sometime early in the year, but here we are, approaching May, and we've not seen them. But again, COVID kind of took priority, and that's to be expected. All right, let me take a look here. One more. Are RAPs only in patient records? No, RAPs actually are not just in patient records. You also have physician-based or provider-based services that are not facilities. And then you have your inpatient facility and outpatient facility. So you have 3 different types of providers that are included with RAPs. And with EDPS, it's everything, including durable medical equipment. So much broader and deeper data set than RAPs. Can you speak to where Centauri was more accurate with regard to accruals than some of our other competitors? I certainly could if I had my specialty analytics team with me on the call, because I chose one example that we did earlier in the year for one of our clients where it was kind of we caught this just in time, but this is an actual example of where we were a little more accurate than the prior vendor was. to be able to help our health plan make that change. But we do have other examples of this. And so certainly we can, if you're interested, we can send that along to you. But yes, we do have a few examples of where that was the case. And it's always good. One of the best practices that I say is, if you have a vendor, always be doing internal auditing and have somebody, checking behind every now and then, because you never know when you need to make tweaks and when a fresh pair of eyes might be helpful. All right, CMS released guidance that for diagnoses capturing for risk, it must be conducted with both video and audio to meet the face-to-face requirement. Phone-only services can be utilized for some HEDIS measures, though. That is correct. And in fact, the audio in that memo, CMS specified it has to be audio and video real-time telecommunication, and that's causing a lot of concern in the industry about what that means. And in terms of the types of things that we see health plans doing to try to make sure they reach their members is distributing smartphones, tablets, and other technology to try to make sure they can affect change, close gaps, and continue taking care of their members. So we're seeing some real creativity with that, which is good. Let me see if we've got any others. And I think that is all the questions. Certainly continue to send those in because we've got plenty of time. I did allow more than usual time for questions because I like to do that. So keep them coming. And we will move along here. All right, and now we come to our last polling question. So let me come up here and open the last poll. Did you learn something new today? And I will launch this. It is certainly my hope that you come away from our time together today having learned something new. If your answer to this question is, I want to learn more about EDPS and RAPS comparative analytics, or what Centauri has to offer to support commercial and government health plan programs, the next slide will give you a contact person to be able to do that. I always encourage people to reach out to me to talk shop or discuss concerns and opinions. My door is never closed. And many of you on the call who I know, do that frequently. And I really value those communications and relationships. And sadly, Rise Nashville was postponed, so I missed seeing a lot of you this year, but hope to see you in June. We will be there as usual, and hopefully you will stop by and talk to us, and we can certainly show you more of the really cool work we're doing in terms of submissions and specialty analytics. All right, so looks like everybody has voted. Looks like we have 94% yes, 0% no, which is good. 6% maybe, and D, none of the above is 0%. So great. That makes me very happy. So I will hide that and continue. And here I just wanted to, before I have, of course, for more information, please contact our wonderful sales folks. I just wanted to, put a slide up here that kind of gives an overall description of our risk adjustment offerings. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because, this isn't a sales call, but I did want to point out that we do offer, of course, a full suite, full service risk adjustment program. And we do also offer strategic advisory services. One of the most fun things that I do is, health plans evaluate themselves against those best practices and help them close those gaps. So if you find yourself in that position, do reach out to us and we can, arrange for that. And that's actually one of my favorite things to do. So of course we do risk adjustment suspecting, medical record retrieval, medical record coding, submissions, and then of course those specialty analytics that I was talking about earlier, inclusive of EDPS and RAPS, comparative analytics, accruals, and other typical financial reporting that goes along with risk adjustment. And here, of course, is, please contact us if you would like more information. Ray Evans is our sales contact person. Of course, reach out to me. I am on LinkedIn, and like I said, I always welcome my industry contacts to be able to, discuss things that are concerning you, pass along information, anything that's on your mind.